What have I done? Oh my God, what have I done? I said repeatedly, pacing around like someone lost in an unfamiliar place, trying to find her way. It was already late due to traffic and due to the large distance between places in US. I had just one opportunity to make a move before nightfall. If I made the wrong move in search of the hairstylist, I will have to spend the night right there or risk roaming in the night, which I was never ready to do. Who has the handbag? Do you know her? Do you have her number? Is there a way we can reach her? Do you know where she stays? The security guy said as he stood up and walked up to me. I know nothing about her, and the first time we met was on the bus on my way to the bank. The only thing I know is that she's a hairstylist, and I got to know that from her discussion with her colleague on the bus who claimed to be a drop shipper. I'm not even sure if they're truly who they claim to be. I'm just quoting them, and know absolutely nothing about them, I said, as I fought to hold back my tears, refusing to let them fall. What do I do now? It's getting late. I can't find my check and also can't find my house key. Isn't this too much for a teenager to bear? Why am I going through all this? What did I do to deserve this? I muttered bitterly under my breath. Wait a minute, did you just say she's a businesswoman? If that's true, then her business card must be inside this bag. Very good. I found it. Come take a look. Her number is even boldly written on the back. Dial the number quickly, the security guy said. I rushed to him, grabbed the card, dialed the number, and called her immediately. It rang, but she didn't pick. I called again, it rang, but she didn't pick. I called 5 times. They all rang, but she didn't pick. I became skeptical and began to doubt her personality and integrity, wondering if she saw the call and refused to pick on purpose. She had just lost her handbag containing valuables, and so had I. It was expected of both of us to be vigilant and perhaps expecting random calls, let alone seeing them and refusing to pick. Only a thief would do that, willing to risk their loss to win something better. I began to lose my temper and called for the 6th time, hoping she would pick up so that I could unleash my rage over the phone. As usual, it kept ringing, and just when it was about to stop, she picked up. This is Dorothy. Am I speaking to Mrs. Peace? I said. Yes, you are. Please, how can I help you? I'm currently at TD Bank. We boarded the same bus on my way to the bank, and unfortunately, I took your bag instead of mine. I only realized it when I arrived at the bank. Are you serious? I've been restless since morning, jumping from pillar to post in search of my handbag because it contains very vital information that I just can't afford to lose. I'm even close to that bank. This is a miracle. Please remain there, and please do keep it safe. I'm coming right away, she said, readjusting my belief and reassuring me that my perception at that moment about her was actually wrong. Okay, but please do also remember to come along with my handbag, I said. Unfortunately, she ended the call while I was still speaking. I wanted to call again to remind her, but the security guy said I shouldn't bother because there was no way she would leave with her handbag without bringing mine. If she forgot it, she would have to go back and bring it. That sounded like an unwanted risk because it was getting late already, but I mellowed and didn't call again. We waited for 30 minutes, and suddenly, a taxi pulled up in front of the bank. The security guy should have left already because it was almost 6 p.m., but since the woman said she was close by and was coming, he decided to wait and see the end of the whole thing because he was scared that the woman might be an imposter, and hence, could rob or kidnap me. He asked me if that was the woman, and I said yes because she was chubby and in fact, was still wearing the same dress she wore on the bus. She walked up to us, we exchanged pleasantries, and I was happy to see her holding my handbag. She gave it to me, and I gave her mine. We both checked to confirm that everything was intact. Streams of joy flowed through my heart as I opened my bag and found my check intact. Although my things were scattered, I reckon she did that when she was looking for a means to contact me, just like I did to hers. She was extremely glad, as much as I was, to see that not even a single pin was missing from her bag. What's your name again? She asked. Dorothy. My name is Dorothy, I replied. I don't know how to thank you for this. I never thought I was going to see this bag anytime soon, let alone find it intact. What do you do? Where do you live? I can't let this act of kindness and integrity just go by without rewarding it, she said, and I looked at the security guy in wide-eyed wonderment, not knowing what to say. Don't be scared, speak up. She doesn't look suspicious. Go ahead, seize this opportunity, he said, encouraging me to feel relaxed and answer. I'm not doing anything yet. I lost my mom a month ago, and I was actually coming to the bank to claim the only asset she left behind for me before I got caught up in this mishap. I was actually lost in your conversation with your colleague, Helen, if I am not wrong, on the bus, especially because I needed someone who would advise me on what business to do with the money my mom left for me. That was actually what made me take your bag in place of mine. I got lost in thoughts, I said, awakening the nostalgic feeling of the past which made me emotional. Oh my God, you're so small, and yet you've been through so much in life. I'm so sorry for your loss. Who do you live with? Or you know what, she said as she opened her bag, brought out her business card, stacked it with some money, gave it to me, and asked me to come to her shop the next day. With a newfound sense of hope, I glanced at the security guard who was still watching over us. He gave me a thumbs up and a smile that spelled, "Congratulations." She assured me that she would help guide me through the process of making wise financial decisions. The prospect of learning from someone experienced and kind-hearted like her filled me with excitement and anticipation. As she prepared to leave, she turned to me and said, "See you tomorrow, Dorothy. And don't forget, you're not alone on this journey." "I won't forget. Thank you so much, ma'am," I replied with a genuine smile. She boarded an Uber, and I watched as it drove away. At that moment, time lost its grip, and the world around me faded into insignificance. I was transported into a state of unadulterated bliss, a kind of enchantment that blurred the boundaries of reality. My joy became a magnet, attracting all my worries, pains, tears, and anxiety into a spectrum of fleeting shadows. I became lost in meditation, marveling at the indispensable power of human connection. The security guard patted me on the shoulder, and that was when I jolted back into consciousness, like someone who had been brought back to life. "All the best, I shall be on my way now," he said and left. I reckoned he must be God-sent because I least expected such a level of genuine kindness from a bank's security personnel. Since it was already getting late and I now had little cash, I boarded an Uber for the first time en route home, clutching the business card and the stack of money. I couldn't help but reflect on the twists and turns life had taken me through that day. From mistakenly taking Mrs. P's bag, to forming an unexpected friendship, it was a roller coaster of emotions and dreams come true. I felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose as I thought about the possibilities that lay ahead. Tomorrow was a new day, and with Mrs. P's guidance, I was ready to explore new avenues and make the most of the opportunity my mom had left me. Little did I know that this chance encounter would lead me down a path I had never imagined, one filled with friendship, learning, and the potential to build a brighter future. As I looked at the stars through the car's window twinkling in the night sky, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the journey I was about to embark on. I arrived home by 7 p.m., feeling as light as a butterfly. In just one day, a single connection had swallowed all my burdens and worries. I remembered when I was inside the bus in the morning, listening to their conversation. If someone had told me that one of these ladies would become my mentor that very day, without me paying a dime, I really would have taken it as a joke and never believed it. But right before my door I stood that night, having in my possession the business card of a business tycoon, invited for free mentorship, not time-bound, but until I become successful. I brought out my keys from my bag, opened my door, and immediately I got inside. I knelt down, spread my hands in gratitude, and began to pray, and thank God for letting me go through a bad day, only to make a good day out of it. I never saw that coming, and I begged God to forgive me for all the harsh words I threw at him, thinking he had forgotten and abandoned me. I felt bad and wished I had never questioned God. The next day, having taken my bath, I thought of what to wear to go see Mrs. Peace. I didn't have many clothes. I stood with my hands on my hips, staring at my scanty and desolate suitcase, smiled, and picked my orange gown. The rain of blessings and open doors was about to begin falling on my life, and I no longer allowed my necessities to become my weaknesses because God finally made my wishes a white horse, and the ride had just begun. In order not to be late, I boarded an Uber for the second time, gave him the address, and he took me to Mrs. Peace's salon. When I arrived at the salon, I realized that it was actually bigger than what I had thought, and what she had described on the bus the previous day. Nestled amidst the vibrant cityscape of US, her salon, well endowed, stood as a testament to elegance and luxury. Its grand exterior beckoned passers-by with an air of sophistication and an aroma of gratification, hinting at the extraordinary experience that lay within its walls. Upon stepping through its doors, guests were enveloped in an atmosphere of refined splendor. The interior was adorned with exquisite furnishings and tasteful decor, combining modern aesthetics with timeless elegance. Gilded mirrors lined the walls, reflecting the warm, soft lighting that bathed the space in gentle radiance. Amidst this resplendent scenery, a symphony of skilled stylists and artists worked their magic. The bustling energy was tempered by an air of professionalism and attention to detail, as each stylist consulted with their clients, ensuring their visions were not only met but exceeded. Beyond the hairstyling stations lay a secluded space of comfort, private spa rooms for personalized treatments that pampered the body and soul. Lavish lounge chairs, adorned with soft throws and plush pillows, created an inviting haven for clients seeking a moment of relaxation amid their busy lives. I was wowed beyond my wildest imagination. It all began to seem like a dream, and I prayed I would never wake up. "Is that you, Dorothy?" I heard a voice behind me that mirrored that of Mrs. Peace. I turned, and lo and behold, it was Peace and Helen, her colleague I had met on the bus the previous day. "Yes, it's me. Good morning, ma'am." I went close, bent low, and greeted both of them. "Morning, Dorothy. Hope you had a wonderful night. You look good," Mrs. Peace said, while Mrs. Helen wore an anxious smile as she stared at me, as though she had heard so much good about me and longed to see me. "This is the girl I told you about, who was kind enough to return my handbag with the contents unscattered. She was actually the small girl that sat with us at the back of the bus yesterday. She got so interested in our conversation that day, that she became absent-minded, and mistakenly took my handbag in place of hers. When I went to meet her at TD Bank to get my bag, she told me a few things about herself that got me really emotional, and I couldn't help but ask her to come over today, so that I could help her achieve her dreams," Mrs. Peace said to her colleague, Helen. She sighed, looked at me, and said, "Wow, I've heard so much about you, Dorothy, and I'm glad we finally met. I heard about your mom's dismiss. Sorry about that. Don't worry, you're no longer alone. We've got you. I never expected you to be so young. You've really been through so much at such a young age. You look really beautiful and innocent, and I wish you never went through all of this. But it's okay now. You've got Peace, and you've got me. We won't give up until we get you in the spotlight. Come here, give me a hug, Dorothy," Helen said. I dragged my feet with my eyes covered in tears, ready to overflow, and wrapped my hands around her, lost in the motherly maze of her warm embrace. Like a butterfly, my heart grew wings and fluttered, flapping away all my anxieties and feelings of loneliness. Her embrace enveloped me in a cocoon of peace and tranquility, where worries took flight. Glittering tears danced down my cheek in relief, like dewdrops on fragile petals, mirroring the fragility of my newfound hope. I felt her kindness so deeply that it became a wonder drug, mending the broken fragments of my spirit. I tried so hard but couldn't let go, and when she noticed it, she moved me gently to the right, wrapped her right arm around me, and we walked into Mrs. Peace's salon. They took me to the spa room meant specially for VIP customers, consoled me for 20 minutes until I stopped crying, and wore a happy face. They asked me to tell them everything about myself, withholding nothing, so that they could better assist me as much as they could. I took them on a sad journey back to where it all started, my mom's death, and told them how I ran to the east and the west, desperately looking for money to borrow and pay for my mom's hospital bill so that the doctors could begin treating her. I told them how most of the men I met, including my uncle, demanded that I give my body in exchange for the money, but I refused and kept staring at the clock until my mom could no longer persevere and gave up the ghost. I told them about Lisa, my colleague at the hotel where I worked, whom I invited to come live with me after my mom's death, thinking I had found a friend. Unfortunately, she had already resolved to commit suicide because her past life caught up with her, and she became HIV positive. I also told them about the check and the letter my mom left behind for me. I told them how much suffering and pain my mom endured in the hands of my dad because my grandma forced him to marry my dad for money, and she despised the man she truly loved because he was an electrician. As I kept talking, I noticed both of them fighting hard to hold back their tears. I rounded up by telling them the twist of fate that brought them to me. I told them I was actually on my way to the bank the previous day to cash the check my mom left behind for me, hoping to start something tangible. I prayed it succeeded because if it failed, I will be doomed for life. It was the only means of survival I had as an orphan. "You mean you went through all this and you're still alive? Are you serious?" Mrs. Helen said, sounding as though she wanted to cry. "Yes, ma'am, I did," I replied. Mrs. Peace was highly emotional at that moment and kept staring at me, not knowing what to say. I locked my hands and kept rubbing my fingers against my palm, trying so hard to hold back my tears. "What do we do?" Mrs. Helen asked Mrs. Peace. "I think she should come live with me," Mrs. Peace said. "No, let her come live with me," Mrs. Helen interjected. My eyes widened like a protagonist stumbling upon an unforeseen turn of events. I sat at the crossroads of their emotional crossfire, my heartstrings resonating with the suspense of an unfolding narrative. My life suddenly became a canvas painted with bewildering strokes of astonishment and wonderful uncertainties. Imagine two friends arguing over a special gift they both want to give you, and you're stuck in the middle, not sure what to do. That was how I felt, like I was part of a surprising and intense moment, almost like in a movie or book. Okay, I think we should let her decide. Let's ask her what she would love to be, a hairstylist or a drop shipper. Whichever one she chooses, she will automatically get to live with the tutor, Mrs. Peace said. Mrs. Helen went silent for a minute and said, "I agree, let's do it that way." In a moment of delightful coincidence, their smiles bloomed in unison, like sunflowers turning towards the warm embrace of early sunlight. As they both turned to me, Mrs. Helen said, "Dorothy, don't mind us. Peace won't let me take you, and I won't let her take you either. We've decided to let you choose who you would like to live with between the both of us. What kind of business would you like to do, Dorothy? Would you like to become a hairstylist or a drop shipper? Whichever one you choose, you get to live with the coach, as it should be." Right before me were two compassionate and kind-hearted ladies, asking me to choose who I would love to learn from and, perhaps, live with. That was actually the most difficult and complex question I've ever been asked in my whole life. Whatever I decided at that moment would determine who I was going to become in the future. If I chose Mrs. Peace and my destiny was tied to Mrs. Helen, I might not go through hardship in life, but I might never become who God had ordained me to be. On the other hand, if I chose Mrs. Helen and everything I needed to become, who I was born to be, was with Mrs. Peace, I would end up living an unfulfilled life, and I definitely wouldn't want that kind of life. Inasmuch as they were both wonderful individuals, I could still end up becoming mediocre if I made the wrong choice. I needed to overlook the fun and face the facts. I needed to look beyond the wealth, count the cost, and weigh the losses. Mrs. Peace, a skilled hairstylist, enjoyed considerable success. She had a loyal clients of repeat customers, and a select group of affluent women comprised her customer base. Her salon stood out as a unique establishment that consistently captivated her patrons, ensuring their return. The air of nobility that surrounded her salon attracted customers who were descendants of fame and fortune. However, one certainty prevailed: her competitors found it exceedingly challenging to surpass her. This wasn't solely due to her ability to treat her customers like true queens and prioritize their needs above her ego. It was also attributed to her possession of all the necessary requisites, along with essential and captivating gimmicks, gizmos, and gadgets. These elements were essential in attracting clients, even individuals with impaired sight, to her salon. Her salon was well endowed, and only a few of her competitors could afford such a level of bewitching and absorbing oasis of elegance. Not just her manners, but her money was one of the reasons why she was exceptional and one of the best among all the stylists in U.S. Mrs. Helen, on the other hand, was a drop shipper, and unlike Mrs. Peace, she never needed a treasure trove of splendor where opulence flows like a river of gold. Even without a luxurious store or shop, she controlled millions and cashed out really big, just like Mrs. Peace. One could initiate Mrs. Peace's business with a modest amount of capital and could readily expand it, gaining recognition as a household name. This contrasted with the situation faced by Mrs. Peace, where expanding required renting additional shops. Mrs. Helen's business was ideally aligned with the technological trends of the time, where technology played a significant role in the operations. It allowed for the convenient delivery of numerous high-value goods from the comfort of one's home to thousands of customers. In contrast, the hairstyling business posed considerable challenges when it came to achieving such substantial levels of scalability. I was able to deduce all of this from their conversation on the bus that day. I realized from everything they said that day that a drop shipper could make more money without much stress compared to a hairstylist. I discovered that as a drop shipper, you could harness the power of the internet and social media to facilitate increased sales, all while incurring minimal expenses for shipping. Conversely, as a hairstylist, a substantial investment was required, particularly for procuring materials, in order to achieve the same level of success. Therefore, I made the decision to pursue a path as a drop shipper. With only $500 at my disposal, this amount was deemed sufficient to provide me with a solid foundation in the dropshipping business, especially when compared to the prospects of becoming a hairstylist. Their eyes brimmed with anticipation, like a pair of hawks keenly observing their prey. It was as if the world had hushed to a standstill, their stares magnets pulling for an answer. In that charged moment, their faces became open books of curiosity, each line an eloquent question mark, begging for a reply to complete the sentence hanging in the air. A drop shipper. I would love to become a drop shipper, I said. A radiant smile blossomed on the face of Mrs. Helen. Her eyes sparkled like the glister of a shooting star. Her smile stretched wide, touching the east and the west, as a bubbly laughter escaped her lips, dancing like a carefree stream sparkling under the warm embrace of sunlight. Meanwhile, Mrs. Peace exhaled a subdued sigh, a wisp of disappointment escaping her lips, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken hopes. Her shoulders, which had stood high with anticipation, relaxed into a sliver of resignation. Her gaze dropped momentarily, like a fragile leaf falling from a tree in autumn. Yet, amidst this fleeting disappointment, her eyes held a flicker of resilience, a determination to weather the storm and let it slide, knowing it's but a game of charity. The next thing I was about to say would definitely shatter their hearts, but I learned that from my late mom. She taught me that it was better to reside in a thatched house than to cohabit in a mansion with someone you know little about, whose lifestyle could adversely influence you. After reading the letter my mom had penned to me and hearing everything my late friend Lisa had shared with me, I became cautious around humans, especially the wealthy ones. As Mrs. Helen was on the brink of expressing her excitement for my choice to learn from her, building upon what I had mentioned earlier and conveying my interest in becoming a dropshipper, I made an additional request. I added, would you kindly consider not making it obligatory for me to live with my mentor? I genuinely appreciate your kind offer, but residing with my tutor might hinder my concentration. I plead with you to permit me to continue residing in my own home while I attend my daily learning sessions until I finish the training. They exchanged dumbfounded looks, amazed that I could turn down such an enticing offer. Their shock was evident as they shared a chuckle and exclaimed in unison, "Wow!" They exchanged astonished glances once more. You appear small, yet you converse like an adult. You must be remarkably intelligent, Dorothy. Your meticulousness is admirable and understandable. It's all right, you don't need to reside with me to receive my assistance. It's not obligatory at all. I admire your open-mindedness. Consider it settled, all right, Mrs. Helen assured me, while Mrs. Peace maintained a continuous smile, her startled eyes fixed on me. Thank you, ma'am, I'm truly grateful, I expressed, my head lowered, feeling a nervous excitement coursing through me. Summoning courage from within, I managed to utter those words. Even then, I avoided meeting their eyes as I spoke. Instead, I focused on the lush green grass beneath me, idly playing with my fingernails. Dorothy, I hope to have a daughter like you someday. You possess wisdom and knowledge beyond your years, like a married woman. I deeply admire you, Mrs. Peace remarked. I was amazed and relieved, as I had misjudged her silence, assuming she was disappointed in me. Mrs. Helen's phone rang. Glancing at her screen, she frowned, stood up, and retreated behind the sofa they were seated on to answer the call. Seizing the opportunity, Mrs. Peace went to check on her stylists to ensure everything was proceeding smoothly. We sat across from each other, a luxurious table between us. Mrs. Helen shielded her face, her back turned to me as she conversed on the phone. Based on her gestures and fleeting glances, it was clear she was worried, and something was amiss. The call persisted for nearly 30 minutes, and even when Mrs. Peace returned to the spa room, Mrs. Helen remained engrossed in the conversation. Only a few more minutes passed before the call concluded, and she returned to her seat, wearing a discontented expression. They exchanged a brief conversation about the matter, their hushed whispers preventing me from catching their discussion. Thanks to the distance, I heard nothing, but I discerned that something had gone wrong. I feigned absent-mindedness, continuing to toy with my fingernails. After their chit-chat, Mrs. Helen wore a forced smile and said, "All right, Dorothy, I must leave now. A client requires my attention. You can still come here tomorrow, and I'll pick you up to accompany me to my office, officially commencing the apprenticeship." "Of course, ma'am, I'll be here tomorrow morning without fail." "Thank you," I affirmed. "I'll be back shortly, Dorothy," Mrs. Peace announced, standing up to escort Mrs. Helen out. A few minutes after they left, while I was scrolling through my phone, Mrs. Peace re-entered the spa room. Her quick return surprised me, causing me to lift my head in curiosity. To my amazement, I spotted a tall, fair-skinned man walking gracefully toward me, taking a seat on the sofa right in front of me. My eyes were fixed on him in bewilderment, and my head followed the rhythm of his footsteps until he sat down on the sofa. My mouth was half open in shock as I wondered who he was, where he came from, and how he got inside. The last time I checked, everyone in that salon was female. The stylists were young women, and the patrons were a mix of young and older women. How in the world did I end up alone in Mrs. Peace's spa room with a tasty-looking young man? Was it a setup, or was it a coincidence? Was Mrs. Peace aware that a young man had joined me in her spa room, or was she unaware? I thought. As I continued my internal dialogue, attempting to gauge the situation, he interlocked his hands, resting them on his knees, and offered a warm smile. He introduced himself, saying, "Hello Dorothy, I'm Alex. How are you?" Did he really say my name? How does he know my name? Who informed him? I've never crossed paths with him before, just who is he? I pondered silently. My heart raced as I gazed at the handsome stranger named Alex. He appeared friendly, but his sudden appearance and knowledge of my name left me feeling uneasy. "Hi, Alex, I'm fine," I stammered, my mind racing to process the situation. "May I ask how you know my name?" Alex chuckled softly, a twinkle in his brown eyes. "I'm sorry if I startled you. I'm here on business, and Peace mentioned your name when she asked me to come in and wait for her. She said you were a bright young lady she thought I should meet." "Oh, I see," I replied, somewhat relieved that there was a logical explanation. It seemed that Mrs. Peace hadn't disclosed any personal details about me. Still, the surprise element was unsettling. As we continued to chat, I found Alex engaging and easy to talk to. He shared stories about his ventures and the challenges he had faced, and I opened up about my aspirations and recent changes in my life. Eventually, Mrs. Peace returned to the spa room, her smile widening when she saw Alex and me engrossed in conversation. "I see you two have been getting acquainted," she remarked, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "Yes, Mrs. Peace. Alex and I had a nice chat," I replied, still uncertain about her intentions. Mrs. Peace exchanged a knowing glance with Alex before turning her attention back to me. "Dorothy, I thought it would be a good idea for you to meet Alex. He's not just a business associate, he's also an entrepreneur who has made a name for himself in various industries. I thought you might find his experiences and insights inspiring." I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and excitement. Mrs. Peace's gesture was unexpected, but it also felt like a unique opportunity. I thanked her and Alex for their kindness and the offer of guidance. While we continued our conversation, Mrs. Abigail excused herself for a moment, and went to a small fridge at the corner of the room. She returned with a glass of wine, handing it to Alex. "Here you go, Alex. I thought you might like something to drink." "Thank you, Mrs. Peace," he replied, taking the glass with a smile. My eyes shifted from Alex to the glass of wine, and I realized that no one had offered me a drink. Mrs. Peace turned to me, her expression apologetic. "Dorothy, I'm sorry I didn't offer you a drink earlier. My oversight. Let me get you something as well." With a gracious nod, she returned to the fridge and poured me a glass of wine. I accepted it with a polite smile, my earlier skepticism fading as I sipped the drink. However, as time passed, I began to feel increasingly dizzy, and my vision started to blur. Confused, I clutched the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. My mind raced, wondering what was happening to me. It dawned on me that something might be wrong with the drink, but I couldn't fathom why. My surroundings seemed to spin, and I struggled to keep my eyes open. Then I heard the murmuring of Mrs. Peace and Alex's voices before everything went dark, and I fell into unconsciousness. "The boss is mad at us. We took too long to find a teenager for the trafficking business. We need to make sure this one is worth it." A voice, Alex's voice, seeped into my consciousness. "Alex, don't worry. Mrs. Helen should be here any minute now." Another voice, Mrs. Peace's voice, responded. The pieces clicked into place. The words, the context, they were discussing something sinister. My heartbeat quickened, and panic surged within me as I tried to process the chilling realization. It all seemed to happen in a surreal blur. The world around me grew darker, and I struggled to make sense of the situation. I wanted to move, to speak up, but my body refused to respond. Then I heard Alex's voice, scolding Mrs. Helen. "You dropped my call earlier. We need more teenagers than this, and we need them on time. We're paid well for this. It all clicked into place. The phone call earlier, the conversation between Mrs. Peace and Mrs. Helen, they had deceived me, lured me into a trap. Fear and anger surged within me, but I was powerless to confront them. The medicine in the drink was overpowering, and I could feel myself slipping away once more. As if from a distance, I heard Mrs. Peace's voice again. Mrs. Helen, hurry up. We've put Dorothy to sleep. Alex is waiting. Then, nothing. Darkness consumed me, and my consciousness slipped away, leaving behind only fear and confusion. The last thing I remembered were the voices, the words that revealed a sinister plot that had ensnared me, a trap from which I couldn't escape. Somewhere amid the cloud of my unconsciousness, I faintly heard Alex's voice again. We've changed the delivery location. Here's the new address. Deliver her there, and they'll take it from there. The mention of a hotel struck me, and a sense of urgency overcame me. I tried to cling to consciousness, to fight against the encroaching darkness. But it was a losing battle. My thoughts grew sluggish, and the world dissolved into nothingness. In my last fleeting moments of awareness, the realization hit me like a blow. I had been deceived, manipulated into a treacherous game. Mrs. Peace and Alex were not allies. They were accomplices in a human trafficking business, and then, the darkness won, and I surrendered to oblivion. I found myself in a dimly lit room, the air thick with tension and an unsettling quietness. Waking up was a struggle, my head throbbing from the effects of the substance they must have used to drug me. My arms and legs felt like they were weighed down by something heavy, making me feel trapped and overwhelmed with fear. When I could see better, I saw I wasn't alone. There were other girls with me, all tied up and looking confused. Scared eyes met mine, and we all felt really desperate. The room was small, with no windows, and only one door. Are you okay? A quiet voice asked from the corner. I turned and saw a girl with messy hair and tears on her face. She said her name was Veronica, her voice shaking. I don't know what's happening. They brought me here. They said they will help, I said in a low voice. Veronica looked surprised and laughed sadly. Yeah, they told us all that. Said they would give us a fresh start, help us with our problems. Looking around, I saw that each girl had a similar story. We were all tricked into coming here with promises of help and a better life. Their faces showed anger, fear, and feeling betrayed. It was like we were pieces in a bad game made by the people who trapped us. A girl named Joy spoke next, her voice shaking. I was coming home from work when a lady talked to me. She seemed nice, said she had a job offer that would change my life. Then I woke up here. Another girl, Mandy, told a similar story. I was at the park, having a good day, when a guy started talking to me. He was charming, made me feel special. He said he knew people who could help me follow my dreams. Another girl named Ruth sobbed softly. I trusted them. They said they could help me escape my abusive family, give me a fresh start. Now, I don't know where I am or if I'll ever see my family again. Mia's voice was shaky as she spoke up. I met a lady at a library who seemed really kind. She said she could give me a scholarship to study abroad, make my dream of being a doctor come true. But now, it's like my dreams have turned into a nightmare. As each girl told her story, I noticed a pattern. Our captors were really good at using our weaknesses and dreams against us. As we talked, it was clear that all of us fell for the same trick. We were approached by people who acted nice, but they drugged us and brought us here against our will. I got chills when I realized this. We were all caught in a trap, a plan to capture innocent girls and keep them here. I felt scared thinking about what might happen to us. Suddenly, we heard footsteps outside the door. We panicked as the door opened slowly, and we saw a man standing there, all dark and scary. He looked at us like he was thinking hard. Hi, ladies. You all comfy? He said in a cold way. Who are you? Why did you bring us here? One of the girls asked, her voice full of fear and anger. The man laughed, and his laugh made the room feel weird. You're here because you're special. Each of you has something that people want. Then he left, closing the door behind him. The silence was heavy, and I felt really trapped. We need to find a way out of here, Ruth whispered, her eyes looking strong. But how? Mandy asked, sounding scared. The door's locked, and we can't contact anyone. We looked at each other, worried. But I felt determined. We might be stuck for now, but we weren't weak. We will figure out how to escape and make the people who did this pay. Little did we know, this was just the start of our journey. There were tough times ahead, and we will need to be really brave. Even though things were bad, we were strong and ready to face whatever came our way. The door creaked open again, and the same man walked in, his smile making me shiver. It's touching to hear your stories. Almost like a poem, the way hope becomes despair. His voice was mean, and his eyes looked like he enjoyed our suffering. Are you still hopeful, or do you know you're stuck? He teased, a scary reminder that we were helpless. We looked at each other, and I knew we were all still strong. Fear was there, but so was the fight against the darkness. Mia's voice shook, but she was brave. You won't break us. We won't be quiet. You took our freedom, but you can't take our strength. The man laughed in a mean way and left, closing the door. The silence was heavy, and I could feel all of our fear. We were trapped, and the people who did this were enjoying our fear. Suddenly, the room got scarier. Mandy started coughing and throwing up a lot. We all got really scared and started yelling, asking for help. The room was loud with our shouts and her coughs. Help! Somebody, help! Ruth screamed. We joined her and kept screaming for help, feeling really scared. We didn't know what was wrong or what to do. In all the noise, Mandy's coughing got worse, and her face turned super pale. Her gasps and throwing up sounds filled the room. It was really scary, and we didn't understand why this was happening. Just when we were most scared, the door opened, and that same man came in. He looked at Mandy, seeming annoyed. What's happening? Mandy was coughing so loud that it was hard to hear. Her face turned red, and it seemed like she couldn't breathe. Right when the man went to her, Mandy's eyes rolled back, and she fell down, like she fainted. We got really scared as he carried her out of the room. The door closed, and it felt weird without Mandy. Our shouting turned into quiet talking, and the room felt different. We looked at each other, worried and scared about what could happen next. After they took Mandy away, the room seemed colder, and we instinctively gathered together, feeling scared and unsure about what was happening. The quietness in the room felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us, and the only sounds we heard were the quiet whispers we exchanged, almost as if we were afraid of being overheard. Ruth leaned in and whispered, her eyes wide with fear, "Did you notice how he looked when Mandy got sick?" She seemed really worried and wanted to know if anyone else had seen the expression on his face. I replied, my voice shaking a little, "He seemed upset, like he didn't expect this to happen." Veronica shivered and said, "What if they did something to Mandy? What if they're trying things out on us?" We were worried that maybe Mandy was being treated badly, and we wondered if they were doing tests on us too. Speaking so softly that it was almost hard to hear, Ruth said, "We need to figure out how to escape. We can't allow them to keep treating us like this." While we were talking, we started hearing a faraway sound that got louder with each moment. It sounded like footsteps. Our hearts started beating faster as the door opened, and a new man walked in. He was wearing a white coat, and it was a different person from before. "Hi, everyone," he greeted us, his voice sounding both creepy and sweet. "I'm sorry for the trouble we've caused. Our first tests weren't supposed to make you feel this way." His words had a strange mix of kindness and something that didn't feel right. Mia's voice shook as she asked, "What did you do to Mandy?" The man in the white coat's mouth formed a creepy smile. "Mandy is better now. We're doing some tests to make sure none of you have any health problems." His words sounded both reassuring and strange at the same time. My voice, mixed with a bit of anger, asked, "What do you want from us? Why are you making us go through this?" The man looked at all of us, and his behavior made us uncomfortable. "We want to make sure you're all okay before we do anything else. We want to help each of you, but we have to check if there are any health problems first." His words seemed to be a mix of concern and something that didn't feel right. In that room with not much light, we suddenly understood what was happening. It was like we were putting together a puzzle, but it was a puzzle from a nightmare. We realized that Mandy didn't just get sick by accident, it was planned. Now we knew what they wanted us to do what they said. The truth hit us hard, and it felt like a heavy cloud of worry was all around us. We didn't know why they were doing all this, and it made us doubt everything. We were losing any hope we had left. The door opened slowly again, and the man in the white coat left, making everything quiet and eerie. We were thinking so many things, trying to understand how bad the situation was. And just when we were starting to understand how bad it was, a new man came in. He was a real American, dressed more casually, but he seemed like he had control over the situation. "Hi, everyone," he greeted us, his voice calm and sure. "I'm here to say I'm sorry for what you've been through. I know it's been really hard, and I apologize for that." His words were soothing, and he seemed like he genuinely cared about how we felt. What he said felt real, and it was so different from the way we were usually treated. It was like a sudden change that made us wonder why he was acting this way. "I want to talk about what you've been through," he went on, his eyes showing that he understood how we felt. "The things you faced were a way to see how strong you are. We needed to know if you could handle what's coming next." He was trying to help us understand why we went through all those tough situations. Veronica's voice was full of doubt as she asked, "So what's next? Are there going to be more tests?" He nodded, looking serious. "Yes, there will be more tests, but they're to make sure you're okay. We want to give you a chance to have a better life, to get away from the tough times you've been through." What he said sounded good, and a small part of me wanted to trust him. But I still remembered how upset Mandy was, and it was hard to forget that. Even though he was trying to reassure us, we couldn't help feeling scared. "Mandy, what about her?" I managed to ask, my voice quivering. He sighed and shook his head, looking worried. "I'm sorry to say that Mandy didn't do well on the test. She won't be able to be part of what's next." He seemed sad to have to tell us this news. I looked at Veronica, and we both felt more unsure. If Mandy failed the test, why were they letting her leave? Something didn't make sense, and it made me doubt if we were being told the truth. "But for the rest of you," he said, his voice gentler, "you've shown that you're strong and determined. We want to give you a hand." He tried to encourage us and let us know they cared about us. While he talked, I could sense the appeal in his words, the idea of a better future he was presenting. It felt like we could ignore the bad things that happened and focus on the hope he was giving us. Surprisingly, he opened the door, and there was Mandy, looking like a completely different person. She was dressed in a way that made her seem like she had gotten better suddenly. She gave us a small smile and waved, almost like she was saying goodbye. I looked at Veronica once more. Something didn't feel right. It looked like Mandy leaving was planned, like they wanted to make it seem real even if it wasn't. He said it again, like he really wanted us to believe him. "We really want to help you. We just need to ensure your health before we can take the next step. Scholarships for education, a chance to rebuild your lives." The American man's words seemed to make sense to most of the girls. Their eyes lit up with hope, like they suddenly saw a chance for things to get better. They really wanted things to change, to escape from the tough times that had taken over their lives. Veronica and I, though, didn't feel so sure. Something inside us told us to be careful, not to believe everything he said. We tried to tell the others that we had doubts, that things might not be what they seemed, but they were so excited that they didn't really listen. Right at that moment, 5 teenagers came into the room, dressed really nicely. They seemed full of hope and happiness. They talked excitedly about their experience, how they had gone through something similar and came out on top. They seemed like they had completely changed their lives. As they were speaking, some men entered and began to loose the ropes they had used to bind us in a bid to make us trust them. The room was filled with excitement, but Veronica and I looked at each other, understanding what was really going on. We could see that they were trying to trick us, to make us believe something that wasn't true. After the 5 girls left, Veronica and I gathered the others in a corner, away from prying eyes. We pleaded with them to see the truth, to realize that they were being deceived. "They're not really going to help us," Veronica said with urgency. "They're using how desperate we are. Can't you see that?" She tried to make everyone understand the truth, but our words fell on deaf ears. The others were so desperate for a way out that they were willing to grasp at any thread of hope, no matter how fragile. As the day turned into night, Veronica and I were left in the cold embrace of our doubts. The other girls, filled with a newfound hope, went about their discussions, planning their imagined future. In the dim light, Veronica and I quietly talked to each other, planning what we should do next. The whole situation had gotten even more complicated, and we were caught in a tangled web of lies. Even though things seemed dark, we were determined to find out what was really going on and protect ourselves from those who were trying to take advantage of how desperate we felt. The next morning brought a surprising change that amazed us. They opened the big door and ushered us out. We saw the sunlight and felt the fresh air. Our eyes widened as we walked outside and saw the wide open space. The difference between the small dark room we were in before and the big courtyard with many buildings was astonishing. It was like we had entered a completely different place, with everything feeling mysterious, just like the situation we were in. The big gates led to rows of buildings that looked the same, like a refuge in the middle of our confusion. As we looked around, we realized how much space there was. It was a reminder of how trapped we were, and it made us understand how much thought had gone into planning everything that had happened to us. I couldn't believe it, but when I counted, I saw that there were 12 of us now. It hit me that we were all in this together, 12 lives linked by what had happened. We were all caught in this situation because someone had planned it, using our weaknesses against us. They let us walk around the big open space, feeling both amazed and unsure. We could feel a bit of freedom, but at the same time, there was this feeling of discomfort. We wondered how we could have been stuck in such a small room when there was all this space around us. It hit us how they had fooled us, making us think we were free when we really weren't. While we walked, I tried to look at the other girls without them noticing. I could see that some of them were hopeful, but there was also a sense of worry in their faces. It felt like we were all on the edge of something unknown, our lives connected but still unsure of what was coming. Together, we went to a really nice apartment, a place that felt modern and cozy. The air smelled different, in a good way, unlike what we were used to. It was so different from the tight and miserable place we were in before. They took us to different bathrooms, and they were so fancy and unlike anything we had seen. The water running felt good, like it was making us feel better after everything we had been through, even if it was just for a little while. Before long, we were with maids who were there to help us with anything we needed. They were kind and treated us well, so different from how we were treated before. They were gentle and smiled at us, making us feel cared for. They took us in pairs to different rooms, and the design in each room was so perfect and almost like it wasn't real. They told us quietly that we were going to leave the next day. It was a news that made us feel a lot of things. We were both hopeful and doubtful at the same time. It was like these two feelings were competing to see which one would win. They served us food and the meal was amazing, with so much delicious food on a fancy table. We all sat together and even though we were different, we felt like we were a team. We enjoyed the taste of the food, flavors that reminded us of good times we had forgotten. It felt like we could forget about the bad things that happened before and focus on the exciting things that might come. After we finished eating, they told us that there would be a meeting in the afternoon with the American man who talked to us before. We felt both satisfied from eating and also a little worried about what would happen. They told us to take some time to rest and get ready for the meeting later. By chance, Veronica and I were in the same room. We both had the same worries, and it was hard to ignore them. We talked in hushed voices about our doubts. We thought that maybe the things they promised were too good to be real. Even though the idea of a better life was tempting, we had a feeling that something wasn't right underneath it all. In the afternoon, the sun made the room warm and cozy as we all came together in a hall that looked like a classroom. The American man we had seen before was there, standing in front of us. He talked in a way that made his words seem like a beautiful but complicated pattern of untruths. He talked about good things that could happen, like education and a better life waiting for us. The way he spoke was so smooth and carefully crafted, meant to make us believe everything he said. The other girls seemed really captivated by what he said, their eyes shining with hope. But Veronica and I understood each other without saying anything, and our doubt was still strong. We wanted to believe him, but we knew that there were still things we weren't sure about. Even though he made it sound simple, we could feel that the truth was more complicated. When the meeting was over, we were told to rest before the journey that was coming. Veronica and I went back to our room. We talked about our worries and fears, trying to understand all the things that had been happening. We felt unsure about what was coming next, and it made us feel heavy-hearted. But we were still determined to find out what was true. It was like a light that helped us see through the confusion around us. I woke up at 5 a.m. the next day and realized all of this was a dream. From the moment I took an Uber in the morning to Mrs. Peace's salon, down to how they drugged me and sold me to human traffickers, all was but a nightmare. After I returned Mrs. Peace's handbag and collected mine, along with the little cash she gave me for keeping it intact at TD Bank the previous day, and after she asked me to meet her at her salon the next day, I boarded an Uber home. When I went to sleep hoping to go to her salon the next day, I dreamt all of this. My body was soaked in sweat when I woke up, and it felt so real. I refused to believe it was a dream. I even went outside to confirm that I was still in my house and not in the custody of the traffickers. The dark cell, the women, the unfamiliar men, the expansive compound, the houses, the maids, the American man, these images remained as vivid as crystal in my mind and before my eyes. I nearly lost my sanity as I frantically looked for Veronica and the other girls from my dream. I had never dreamt anything so real like that day. I became so scared, and my body began to shiver. A million thoughts ran through my head. What if this is a revelation? What if this is what will happen when I go to see Mrs. Peace? What if they're truly collaborating with human traffickers? I pondered. I immediately grabbed my handbag to ensure my check was secure, and thankfully, it was. I pulled out a folding chair from behind the door and sat down in the corridor of my house. With my hands under my jaw, I tried to comprehend such a scary dream I had about Mrs. Peace, the same day I was meant to visit her salon. The coincidence was too much, and I couldn't just dismiss it. Could it be God trying to warn me not to honor her invitation or encouraging me to go ahead but be very careful? I thought. It was already daybreak, and I had less than an hour to decide whether I should go or stay back and figure things out myself. And to think that Mrs. Helen, whom I had only met once on the bus, was involved in the dream made it even more real and extremely suspicious. How could my second meeting with her turn out to be so terrible and devastating? The fact that both of them were allied with the traffickers in my dream, and none stood by me, made it even more confusing to know whom I should trust in the long run. I wished I had someone I could talk to about the dream so that I wouldn't conclude solely based on my assumptions or interpretation of the dream. I rarely dream, and when I do, my late mom was the one who always provided the interpretation. I wish she was still alive. Since this was the only opportunity I had and it was just a dream, not reality, I decided I would still honor the invitation but be very careful. I wished I had other choices, I would have stayed back. However, this was my only opportunity to learn what to do with the $500 my mom left behind for me. I was afraid of not going, only to later realize it was just a dream or a warning to be cautious. I was careful not to take it too personally and miss the greatest opportunity life presented to me. Instead, I learned from the dream and decided not to accept anything I will be offered when I got there, whether food or drink. I resolved to stay alert and keep my eyes open. Summoning courage, I tidied up the house, showered, had some tea, and headed to see Mrs. Peace at her salon. The address of her salon seemed far from where I lived, so to avoid being late, I ordered an Uber again. It felt odd because it seemed like I was replaying everything I had dreamt. The only difference was the type of car and the Uber driver. Due to my fear, I left the check at home to avoid losing it for any reason. I arrived at the salon, and it was almost identical to the one I saw in my dream. The differences were minimal, and that scared me, as it felt like the dream was becoming real. Nonetheless, I tried to clear my mind and stay focused. I stood a distance from the salon, waiting to see if the dream would play out in reality. I waited to see if Mrs. Peace and Mrs. Helen would call my name from behind. Unfortunately, they didn't, and I felt somewhat relieved. I counted my steps as I approached the salon. I saw several stylists, each busy with a customer. I greeted one of the stylists, introduced myself, showed her Mrs. Peace's business card, and mentioned that she was expecting me. I didn't want to call her, as I wanted to see if the events would match exactly with my dream. She led me inside, and when we reached the other end of the salon, she pointed to a brown door on the left, which I assumed was the spa room. She said Mrs. Peace was inside. As she left, I stood still for a moment, astonished at how closely the salon resembled the one in my dream. To avoid arousing suspicion among the stylists, I decided to enter the room. I turned the doorknob, gently pushed the door open, and peeked inside. I saw about 3 elegantly dressed women receiving facial treatments, and Mrs. Peace was seated on a luxurious sofa at the other end of the room, engrossed in her phone. She heard the door click and looked up to see who it was. As soon as she saw me, she exclaimed in excitement, "Dorothy." She smiled and walked towards me, offering a warm and welcoming hug. She held my hand as we walked over to the sofa. "What can I offer you, Dorothy?" she said. Immediately she said that, I felt a shockwave travel throughout my body. Could this be the drink? I thought. I'm fine, ma'am, please don't trouble yourself, I replied as I sat down on the sofa, resolved never to taste or eat whatever she offers me. Please don't say that, Dorothy. This is our first official meeting and your first time visiting my salon. You don't need to be overly courteous. Just a moment, let me get you something to drink, she said, walking towards the fridge. I'm truly all right, ma'am. I had something before coming, and I'm already full. Please don't bother, I replied, my heart beating faster than usual. Are you serious? It's just a drink. Don't be overly nice, Dorothy, she said, grabbing a bottle of red wine along with 2 glasses from the fridge and placing them on the luxurious table before me. I wanted to persist, but I swallowed my desire to speak out, not wanting her to begin to suspect my strong refusal. She sounded so innocent, and the more she persuaded me, the more suspicious she became, reminding me of the Mrs. Peace I saw in that dream. She sat down close to me, and we began to discuss. So, Dorothy, thank you once again for yesterday. Thanks for returning my handbag intact. I think it was God who used that scenario to bring us together for good. I want to believe it's not a coincidence. As I mentioned, I couldn't just let you go like that after what happened that day. It's really hard to find people who are sincerely honest and trustworthy these days. And by what you did yesterday, you proved you were one, and I was impressed. You've told me a bit about yourself. I genuinely feel for you, Dorothy, and I promise to assist you as much as possible, she said. I sat down quietly, listening carefully as I rehearsed in my mind everything that happened in that dream, ensuring I will be very cautious in my interactions with her. Before I could express my gratitude, she continued, saying, I don't know what kind of business you would love to pursue, but I promise to support you throughout the learning process until you can start your own. Tell me, what would you love to do, Dorothy? Everything that was unfolding was gradually diverging from what I had dreamt, and that greatly diminished my fears. The absence of Mrs. Helen or any third party in our discussion gave me hope that life wasn't recreating that dream in reality. I recalled that in the dream, I had expressed interest in becoming a drop shipper, but given the nightmarish turn it took, I decided to pursue a career as a hairstylist instead. I felt that the dream might have been a warning that becoming a drop shipper could lead to failure. While not entirely certain, I had a gut feeling that made me lose interest in becoming a drop shipper after experiencing such a terrifying nightmare. I would love to become a hairstylist like you, ma'am, I replied, paying close attention to her reaction, trying to know whether she will be pleased that I wanted to follow in her footsteps. Wow, seriously, I could give you some time to think about it, if you want. You don't have to make a decision based on emotion but on what your heart truly desires. I think I should give you more time, she said, not exactly happy but surprised that I aspired to become like her. Seeing that she was doing the opposite of what she did in that dream, I became somewhat convinced that she had no ill intentions. Nonetheless, I remained cautious. I didn't need more time to decide what business I wanted to pursue because I had already rehearsed that conversation in my dream. Whatever I said, I had thought about it enough to know what I truly wanted. I told her I didn't need more time, and that I had already made up my mind before that morning, that I wanted to become a hairstylist. She suggested I go home and think about it, but as I continued to reassure her, she eventually decided to let the matter rest. Since you mentioned you've considered this before coming and that it's your true desire, that's fine. I wanted to ensure your decision wasn't driven by emotions, and now that it's not, it would be my genuine pleasure to take you as my apprentice. Over the next 3 years, I will dedicate my time to teaching you everything I know as a hairstylist, hoping you'll surpass my skills, she said as she poured the red wine into the 2 glass cups on the table and proposed a toast. Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm truly honored to learn under your guidance, I replied, raising my cup of wine and gently placing it back on the table after the toast, without taking a sip. She looked surprised, gave me a puzzled look, and said, Oh my, Dorothy, do you think it's alcoholic? I wouldn't offer that, knowing you're underage. Go ahead, it's safe to drink, it's non-alcoholic. Not really, ma'am, I'm just. I trailed off, and before I could finish, she reassured me by saying, It's all right if you're being cautious. I understand. Don't force yourself, Dorothy. You don't have to drink it if you don't want to. She drank her own wine to the very last drop, smiled at me, and remarked, Once again, you're welcome, Dorothy. I'm glad to have you as my apprentice. As soon as she finished speaking, her phone rang. Glancing at her screen, I saw it was Helen. She excused herself and left the spa room to answer the call. After some time had passed, Mrs. Peace walked into the room. She seemed to be feeling a little down, her mood not quite as cheerful as before. Despite her attempt to put on a smile when she saw me, I could still notice a bit of sadness in her expression. As she settled down next to me on the sofa, she suddenly recalled an important matter that needed addressing. "Oh, I almost forgot. Could you tell me about where you live, Dorothy? I'm curious about your living arrangements and who you share them with." The timing of her question struck me like a thunder, which made me wonder why she hadn't asked this earlier. It was almost like the phone call she received triggered this specific line of questioning. Taking a moment to think, I debated whether I should be completely open or not. While I understood that mentors often need to know about their apprentices' living situation, I had concerns that she might use this information in a negative way, especially considering the unsettling nightmare I had experienced. Then, a memory surfaced. I remembered that she had asked me a similar question when I returned her handbag at TD Bank. Back then, I hadn't gotten the chance to answer before she gave me her business card and invited me to her salon for the next day. Thinking about that moment made me realize that she might have had innocent intentions. This made me lean towards being truthful. I used to live with my mom, but she passed away a month ago. Now, I'm living alone, I said, leaving out the exact details of my home address on purpose. Offering her condolences, she expressed, "I'm truly sorry for your loss, Dorothy. You've faced a lot at such a young age." Curious, she continued, "So, you're on your own managing all your expenses, including rent, without a job." Walking her through the story of my challenges, I described the hardships I faced while trying to gather money for my mother's breast cancer treatment. I explained the difficulties I encountered when seeking assistance, especially from men who expected me to do things that compromised my integrity, and I consistently turned them down. I shared how my uncle was among those who exerted pressure on me, offering help only if I agreed to have an affair with him. I didn't shy away from recounting the heart-wrenching experience of witnessing my mother's battle with breast cancer, till her last breath. Adding to this, I recounted how I lost my job at a hotel, because I refused to engage in an inappropriate relationship with my manager. Mrs. P sighed, and said, "You really held your ground. Facing the loss of your mother due to financial struggles, and yet standing firm against those demands from men. Your choices are truly admirable, Dorothy. Your strength is truly inspiring, and I wish I had possessed such resilience when I was young. Your future is surely bright. Remain strong and please, never be discouraged." "Thank you, ma'am, I won't," I replied. Then, unexpectedly, she presented a proposal that echoed the tempting offer from my dream. "I know this might sound unexpected, but would you consider living with me during the 3 years of apprenticeship? And even beyond that, if you'd like to continue staying with me until you're ready to find your own place, that's completely okay. What do you think, Dorothy?" she inquired. Instantly, I knew how to respond, saying the very words that had effectively worked in my dream. "I'm genuinely appreciative of your kindness, ma'am. However, I believe sharing a living space might lead to distractions for me. I aim to maintain a certain level of separation to enhance my focus on learning from you. I've already settled my rent for a month at my current place, and I'm confident that by the next month, I'll be ready for the subsequent payment. Please don't feel obligated, ma'am. I can handle living on my own. Thank you again for your generous offer," I politely declined. My decision seemed to catch her off guard, her expression reflecting a blend of surprise and comprehension. She knew well that once I made up my mind, it was unlikely to change easily. She respected my choice. "I appreciate your sense of responsibility, Dorothy. But if you ever reconsider, remember that my offer remains open. You're always welcome in my home." Expressing my gratitude, I felt a sense of relief that she respected my decision. Shifting the topic to business matters, she generously shared priceless insights and information to help me develop into a skilled stylist. Our conversation stretched well into the afternoon. Despite the growing pangs of hunger, I refrained from mentioning it. I had resolved not to indulge in anything she might offer until my official start date. Yet, the sensation of hunger started to affect my ability to focus. Somewhere amidst our discussion, she remembered I hadn't taken anything and wanted to offer me something to eat. Drawing on my willpower, I made up a reason, saying I usually don't eat much and wasn't hungry right then. Even though it surprised her a bit, She believed what I said, maybe because I seemed calm. Continuing our conversation, she suggested that I go and observe the stylists working in the salon. This, she said, would help me become familiar with their methods and practices. Suppressing the hunger in my stomach, I persevered and remained at the salon until closing time, which was around 8 p.m. Mrs. Peace kindly suggested that she drive me home, a gracious offer that I politely turned down. Instead, she went ahead and arranged an Uber ride for me, handed over some money, and told me to resume officially the next day. Due to heavy traffic, it wasn't until 10 p.m. that I finally reached my home. My immediate priority was to alleviate my intense hunger, so I quickly went and prepared noodles. As I settled in for the night, feeling excited about the challenges of the upcoming day, my phone began to ring. Glancing at the screen, I saw that it was my uncle calling. I couldn't believe it. My uncle was calling me after a whole month of cold silence. My heart raced as I stared at my phone, wondering why he was reaching out now. It had been him, who had refused to help with the money my mom needed for her breast cancer treatment. All because he had demanded something unthinkable from me, something I had stood my ground against, and as a result, I lost my mom to cancer. The memories flooded back, and I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. I decided not to pick up his call. I watched as my phone rang and then finally stopped. But he was persistent. He called again. I silenced my phone and tried to sleep, hoping to escape the memories that his call had stirred up. Morning came, and I woke up to a text message from him. My heart sank as I read his words. He accused me of snubbing him, and losing respect for him. The audacity! He even had the nerve to mock my mom's death, blaming it on my refusal to comply with his sick demands. The pain was unbearable, and I deleted the message in frustration. How could he be so heartless? My mom's letter had opened up a whole new layer of my past. She had been married into a wealthy family, but they had cast her aside, accusing her of causing my dad's death. They even fired my grandmother, who had worked as an accountant in their company. The story was painful, and I understood that there was still a lot for me to discover about my family's past, but some things were better left unknown. I was glad my mom hadn't mentioned my grandparents in her letter. It saved me from more heartache, although I couldn't help but despise them for what they had done to my mom, and indirectly, to me. Putting my chaotic thoughts aside, I readied myself for another workday. I was committed to concentrating on improving my life, even if I had to hold back the emotions that were ready to overwhelm me. I had made up my mind about something. Despite Mrs. Peace's kind offer of transport money, I was going to board buses to work. I wanted to save any extra money for more urgent needs. So, I left home at an ungodly hour 4:30 a.m., to beat traffic and ensure I will be at the salon by 7:30 a.m. When I arrived at the salon, about 15 stylists were already bustling around, getting things ready for the day. I joined them in their morning cleanup routine, quietly observing and learning how they meticulously tidied up the space. They suggested that I watch and learn for a week before I could actively participate in the cleaning schedule. It was a chance for me to prove my dedication. As customers began to trickle in, seeking various beauty services, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The salon quickly filled with activity, hair styling, makeup, nails, and more. It was a whirlwind of colors, scissors snipping, and brushes sweeping across faces. In the midst of the busy surroundings, Mrs. Peace made her appearance. She appeared glowing in a white chiffon blouse combined with pink palazzo pants. A feeling of warmth enveloped my heart, as she greeted me with kindness. Her being there had a method of soothing my anxiety, and giving me confidence that I was where I belonged. She approached me and asked how my night had been. I replied with a simple, "Fine," not wanting to burden her with my troubles. She introduced me to the salon's product specialist, and I realized that the day was about to get even more interesting. Mrs. Peace explained that the product specialist would teach me about various cosmetics and hair products. I was going to learn about different hair types and textures, as well as the procedures and products needed for each. It was an overwhelming but exciting prospect. Besides learning about the products, Mrs. Peace had arranged for me to follow the stylists during the day. I would observe and gain knowledge from them as they performed their expertise on the customers. Haircuts, applying makeup, and every other detail, I was going to soak up everything. But Mrs. Peace's generosity didn't end there. She had a vision for my growth beyond just technical skills. She mentioned that she will periodically teach me about customer service and the difficulties of running a successful salon. Her belief in my potential gave me a renewed sense of purpose. She spoke of the possibility that my learning journey might be shorter than 3 years, depending on my dedication and peculiarity. I was humbled by her faith in me and motivated to give my all. The day continued, and I completely engaged myself in this fresh realm of beauty and imagination. The salon was vibrant with energy, as stylists and clients united in a dance of change. I moved through the bustling scene, taking in each element and every method. A fresh chapter was starting, and I was committed to welcoming it wholeheartedly, leaving the darkness of my past behind. As the day progressed and the customers became fewer, I at last found a moment to relax. In this calmer period, I noticed Mrs. Peace making her way towards the spa room. Gathering my courage, I went up to her and gently asked, "Ma'am, if you don't mind, could I have a brief conversation with you, please?" She gazed at me with kindness in her eyes, offering a warm smile. "Certainly, Dorothy, what's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, I shared that I needed her approval to take a short break from work the next day. I explained that I wanted to visit the bank to cash the check my mom had left me before it expired. The money was my last hope of survival, and I didn't want to lose out on it. Mrs. Peace paid close attention, nodding in comprehension. "I understand. That's a valid reason. You don't need to worry, Dorothy. Tomorrow, I'll accompany you to the bank. It's a substantial amount, and it's always better to have someone with you in such situations." A sense of relief flooded over me. Her willingness to stand by me was truly comforting. I sincerely thanked her, appreciative of her empathy. The next day, she arrived punctually at 10 a.m., in her blue Toyota RAV4 SUV. We headed to the bank, and upon arrival, Mrs. Peace's presence seemed to carry a weight that made the process seamless. With her influence, I managed to cash the check without much difficulty. However, a minor problem arose. My student account couldn't accommodate the full $500. She used her connections to ensure that a regular savings account was opened for me on the spot. The entire process took less than an hour. I was amazed by the power and influence Mrs. Peace exercised beyond the salon. With the money securely deposited into my new account, we left the bank, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude towards her. However, as we started our journey back to the salon, Mrs. Peace's phone rang. I couldn't help but notice the caller's name on her screen, which read, Helen. It left me feeling anxious. She answered the call, and even though I couldn't clearly hear the other side of the conversation, fragments of words reached my ears. Yes, now. All right, I'm on my way there immediately. After she hung up, she turned to me with a gentle smile. Dorothy, I apologize, but I need to make a quick stop to visit a friend. It won't take long, and then we can head back to the salon. My heart skipped a beat, and my chest tightened. An indescribable uneasiness settled in, and I managed to stutter, "Oh. Okay, ma'am." As we turned and made our way to meet Helen, a whirlwind of thoughts swirled through my mind. What was the urgency behind this sudden meeting with Helen? And why was it Helen again? Was my dream about to come true in a different dimension? It was a moment of both excitement and uncertainty when Mrs. Peace announced that we were headed to a shopping mall. My heart raced as we parked the car and walked towards the entrance, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of shoppers going about their day. Mrs. Peace walked with a purpose, and I followed closely, my anticipation growing. As we neared the exit, my eyes fell on a woman dressed in casual blue jeans. Mrs. Peace's face lit up as she approached the woman, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and anxiety. I watched as they exchanged warm greetings, and it dawned on me that this must be Mrs. Helen. My nerves kicked in as I wondered what role I would play in this unexpected meeting. Breaking away from their conversation, Mrs. Peace turned to me with a smile. Dorothy, come meet Helen. Helen, she's the one I told you about, the girl we met on the bus. Mrs. Peace's gaze was friendly as she extended her hand, her voice warm and welcoming. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Dorothy. Mrs. Peace has spoken so highly of you. Feeling a mix of surprise and gratitude, I shook her hand. Thank you, ma'am, I managed to say, my voice a bit shaky. Mrs. Helen's smile widened, and she patted me gently on the shoulder. Keep up the good work, dear. Your determination will take you far. I nodded, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. Her words were encouraging, yet there was an underlying sense of unease, as if the nightmare that had been haunting me was about to come true. As the three of us talked, I tried to catch snippets of their conversation, hoping to find some clue or hint of what was happening. But to my frustration, their dialogue revolved around business matters, things like real estate. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary or suspicious. Mrs. Peace's reassuring smile as we left the mall didn't erase the unease I felt. Back at the salon, I was torn between relief that nothing fishy had happened but a sense of worry lingered and wouldn't leave me. Determined to put my worries aside, I focused on learning everything I could about the salon business. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Each day brought new skills, from hairstyling techniques to understanding how to treat customers well. Mrs. Peace was impressed with my progress and began talking about my graduation. 1 year later. The day finally came when I stood in the spa room, surrounded by friendly faces. Mrs. Peace handed me a certificate, and my heart swelled with pride. It was a testament to my hard work and dedication. Among the gifts was a small, shiny package. Mrs. Peace's eyes twinkled mischievously as she watched me unwrap it. "Go on, open it," she encouraged. My heart raced as I opened it. To my amazement, it was a key to my own salon. Mrs. Peace explained that it was located in a lively town in US, a place where I could start my journey as a business owner. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at Mrs. Peace, overcome with gratitude. It was hard to believe that my dreams were being realized in such a way. We discussed plans for the grand opening and made arrangements to pray together, a mix of excitement and nervousness building up within me. A week later, the day had arrived. I stood in front of my salon, a mix of emotions churning within me. Mrs. Helen had come to witness the official opening, and my heart swelled with a sense of accomplishment as Mrs. Peace asked me to open the salon amidst a group of well-wishers. Overwhelmed with gratitude, I thanked everyone, my heart bursting with appreciation for the people who had believed in me. With each passing day, my salon grew and flourished. I put my heart and soul into making it a welcoming place for customers. The money my mom had left me, combined with Mrs. Peace's support, allowed me to invest in better equipment and create an environment where people felt at home. 3 years later, I met Nancy's father, and after few months, he proposed to me and we got married. After a year plus, we gave birth to Nancy, and I vowed in the labor room that my child will never pass through what I've been through in life. I will do everything in my capacity just to give her a comfortable life. I also vowed that my daughter Nancy will not lack anything. I never knew I was doing it in a wrong way. I didn't raise Nancy in the right way. I feel I am responsible for what my daughter is passing through now.
Dorothy, please stop crying. Now I understand why you kept over-pampering Nancy. But please do not blame yourself. Nancy is still very young and can still be corrected. It is not too late. You can still bring her up in the right way. Let her know the difference between right and wrong, and most importantly, draw her closer to God. It is well with you, my dear.
Blessed God, I come before you today with a heavy heart. I ask that you hear my prayer for my daughter in coma, and grant her the strength and courage to overcome this difficult time. Lord, we know that you are a God of miracles, and that nothing is impossible for you. Therefore, I ask that you to perform a gift in my daughter's life. Wake her up from coma. God, please, heal my daughter, bring her back to life. I don't want to lose my only child, God, please. Nanny, what is it?
Dorothy, Nancy is awake.
Nanny, are you serious? I'm on my way to the hospital. I'm coming right away.
All right.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord, for answering my prayers. I know you will never leave nor forsake me. Thank you, Jesus. I will forever be grateful.